Good afternoon from London and welcome to the Nest Centre's midweek briefing. I'm John Lough, the head of foreign policy. Today we're venturing outside the borders of the Russian Federation to Moldova. On Sunday, parliamentary elections will take place that are likely to have a significant effect on the country's future foreign policy course. They look set either to confirm Moldova's efforts to continue its integration into Europe with the goal of eventually joining the EU, or they may signal a move back towards Russia. The stakes are high for this small country, and there are allegations that Russia has spent very heavily to influence the election result. Some sources suggest that the Kremlin may have invested up to 300 million euros for this purpose. Using undercover reporters, the BBC World Service recently penetrated a secret Russian-funded network set up to spread disinformation. The investigation established links between the secret network and the Moldovan oligarch Ilan Shor, who is sanctioned by the United States for malign influence operations on behalf of the Kremlin. And I should add that Shor is a fugitive from Moldovan justice who is currently residing in Moscow. The electorate is, probably crudely speaking, split roughly half and half in terms of geopolitical orientation. The pro-European policies conducted by President Sandu's PAS party over the past 4 years have not delivered economic growth or very limited economic growth, and have failed to stem the outflow of the population. And for context, Moldova signed an association agreement with the European Union in 2014, and it received EU candidate status in 2022. And it started accession negotiations with the EU in June 2024. Much has changed since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine in 2022. The closure of the border with Transnistria by Ukraine has led to closer relations effectively between Chisinau and the breakaway region. So that we have to recall that a Russian-backed separatist regime has been in power in this sliver of the country since 1992, and has cumulatively acted as a brake on Moldova's efforts to consolidate its independence and integrate into Europe. I think it's fair to say that probably for the almost last 35 years, it's suited Moscow to have Moldova as a kind of buffer state that it can control. In addition, it's been a place where Russian organized crime has flourished thanks to Russia's foothold in the Transnistria region. The large number of Moldovan citizens with Romanian passports has, I think, ultimately facilitated the process of extending criminal business to the EU countries, as well as certain destabilization strategies. So with us to discuss these issues, I'm delighted to welcome Iurie Leancă, who was Moldova's prime minister from 2013 until 2015. And prior to that, he was the country's foreign minister from 2009 to 2013. Good afternoon, Iurie. It's great to have you with us.
Good afternoon, John, and thank you very much for inviting me to join this important to me briefing.
Well, let's go straight in.
Sure.
There is a lot of commentary in Western media at present that suggests that these parliamentary elections will be truly decisive for Moldova's future. I sort of find myself thinking that, we have perhaps heard this before. They're depicted again as a sort of struggle between the gravitational pull of the EU on the one hand and Russia on the other. So is it a correct characterization to say that these are really elections that are decisive for Moldova's future?
Well, John, as you rightly mentioned, every election in Moldova is decisive. I remember the elections back in 2009, when I just was acting as a young politician. And we had to fight communists who, as you can imagine easily, were pleading very much for the pro-Eastern vector in our policy, for joining Russia, Belarus back when they came to power. So we were saying that it's now the decisive moment because we want to break with our past and move towards the European Union. And that's why even the coalition, which we set up then in 2009, was called Coalition for European Integration. So this time they again decisive because we were still somehow anchored in our past. The nostalgies are still very strong. The old ambitions are still displayed vividly in our region. But the new element, of course, which changed completely the picture compared to 2009, is the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which affected in first place, of course, Ukraine, its citizens, and its economy, but also to some extent Moldova and the entire region. So yes, they are to some extent decisive, but maybe it sounds a bit strange and even curious, but I would argue, and I think I have enough arguments to say that Moldova today is much less vulnerable to the Russian influence than it used to be before in 2009, 2014, for example. And let me explain why. Back in 2009-14, Russia had, so to say, official leverage, state leverage to influence Moldova and to destabilize Moldova and to punish Moldova. Energy. We were dependent 100% on the Russian gas delivery. And whenever Russians would be displeased with someone, they would just, remember twice at least in our recent history when they just closed the tab, not just for Moldova, but for the bigger region. The very expensive tariffs. So gas was one important element. Then trade. In 2009, I think up to 45% of our trade was going towards Russia. So whenever they were again displeased with us, like when we didn't sign the COSAC memorandum, or just 2 days after I signed the association agreement and the free trade agreement with the European Union in 2014, they applied sanctions on our goods, and especially on the most sensitive one, wine. As you know, we are a wine country, or in 2014 on our apples, and then 95% of our apple export went to the Russian market. So today they cannot do it anymore, for the very simple reason. I just today asked our ambassador in Moscow, what's the percentage of Russia in our foreign trade? It's 3-4%. Why? Because we signed the free trade area, and since then the dynamics started to change. Look at Transnistria. We were always extremely vulnerable because of having Transnistria. You referred briefly to it. But since Crimea's annexation and as a result of it, a complete change of Ukrainian attitudes on this separatist region, Russia's influence to build up militarily, economically in Transnistria has diminished. I still remember very well 2013 when Yanukovych was in power, and we learned from the press that Kiev allowed a huge Russian military convoy to transit Ukrainian territory and to enter Transnistria. So today it's impossible to do something like this. So this leverage also disappeared. Look at media. Back already in 17-18, many Russian TV channels were just closed down, and the current government did the same thing. So the chance to influence Moldovan public using the propaganda has diminished also to a big extent. So again, very many things which we have done before, back in 12, 13, 14, which were not consolidated, unfortunately, in my view, by the current government, helped us to diminish this vulnerability on the Russian malign influence, and to become less, more secure and safer. So from this point of view, of course, they are decisive, but not much has changed.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating to hear how much the trade structure has changed in such a really short period. And obviously the start of the full-scale war against Ukraine has led to the closure of the border. And previously it seemed that Transnistria was this kind of wound, this gaping wound on Moldova's eastern border. What can you say about the change in relations between Chisinau and Tiraspol over the last 3 years? Because obviously something fundamental there seems to be happening.
Oh, definitely. Once the war broke and the border was closed, Transnistria's situation and status changed a lot. And by the way, it started already to change once Saakashvili was the governor of Odessa, and he helped to fight a bit the smuggling through Odessa port, which was the main entry point for the smuggling goods to Transnistria. Maybe you remember those figures that the consumption of cigarettes and alcohol and chicken in Transnistria was 100% higher than in the region, because they were using it just as a way to stamp certificates and pretend that it goes into Transnistria, whereas they were just moving afterwards to Ukraine and to Moldova. And the smuggling was a big factor for enrichment of Transnistrian elites, but also those from Ukraine and Moldova. So after the closure, of course, Transnistria's ability to move, to do trade, to bring in whatever they wanted to bring, has diminished a lot, including the leadership of this region was able and is able to travel abroad only via Chisinau. The gas, since the beginning of this year, doesn't go via Odessa and respectively via Transnistria, so they had to go through a big crisis after this decision of Ukraine to close the transit of the Russian gas. Now they depend completely on the gas which comes via Romania, Moldova, and then it moves to the left bank of Dniester River. And this generated a major economic crisis in Transnistria. Russia's ability to influence the developments there have decreased, whereas I think that our ability and Ukraine's ability also to control somehow and to monitor at least the developments in the Transnistrian region of Moldova have increased. Now, if you ask me what's the situation there today, again, preparing to our briefing today, I asked a few friends who used to be in charge of the Transnistrian conflict, and asked them, what do you think, what happens today in Transnistria? And it looks like they were able to go a bit beyond the first shock. They found themselves, one, the border was closed, one, Russia's leverage has diminished, and now they are waiting to see the outcome of the war. Of course, we also want to see the outcome of the war, but based on acceptable for Ukraine terms, probably those in Transnistria, they hope that this advance which the Russians are making militarily, centimeters by centimeters, some days might still get back to this, and thus they can kind of build a bridge with Russia. So right now they again, I'm afraid that we lost the momentum when we could have tried at least to incorporate Transnistria into Moldova. Now they probably will not be very flexible in trying to work out a compromise concerning their status, their rights, and their obligations. But the economic situation in Transnistria was affected. You remember that they were receiving gas from Russia without paying 1 penny. They don't pay even today, because there was an interesting, to me, very strange compromise found. A Hungarian company brings the gas via Moldova to Transnistria, 1/3 of what they used to get before. A Abu Dhabi or Dubai-based company pays the Hungarian company, but the Transnistrians don't pay 1 penny. But the result is that they cannot use the gas for their industries, and they cannot produce the electricity, which we were buying here on the right bank of Dniester. So yeah, they're in a kind of economic predicament right now. We will see what happens, of course, with the developments on the Ukrainian front, but also what happens here in Moldova after the elections on Sunday.
I mean, that really is very significant change. Iurie, I just have to, because I omitted to say at the start of the briefing that if our viewers have comments or questions, please, as always, put them in the chat, and I will do my best to respond to you. But Iurie, let's just continue on that track. You said, you know, a lot depends, well, obviously what happens in the war in Ukraine, and I think it's very hard for any of us to predict, you know, how long this is going to take and exactly how it will end up. But in terms of developments within Moldova itself, what sort of result do you feel that this election is going to deliver? I mean, my understanding is that Maia Sandu's PAS party is certainly not going to repeat its performance in the last parliamentary elections, that you've got 101 seats in parliament and it may be able to secure something around 40, 42. But to obviously establish a majority, it's going to have to go into coalition. I mean, is that the most likely outcome, or could we see one of these Russian-backed, how should I say, movements or coalitions then, in fact, you know, storming to victory?
John, it's very difficult to predict the outcome of the elections on Sunday for two reasons. One is because no one trusts anymore the opinion polls conducted here in Moldova. They are all biased. I mean, who pays for their conduct, probably he gains most of the percentage. But if you look at the opinion polls, the ruling party can get from 22% to 33%. One survey was published just today, being a small distance on the second place from the Alliance of Communist Socialists, or the former Communist Party. And the second factor, which puts us in a position to not be able to predict a more or less precise outcome, is our diaspora. We don't know how many will show up and how will they vote, because it's clear that the ruling party will not get any more that majority, that overwhelming majority which they used to get 4 years ago, because the level of disappointment is very, very big. So what will happen Monday? I guess that it's almost improbable that Maia Sandu's party will get the majority, more than 51%. But now conspiracy theories flow here in Chisinau with an unbelievable speed. Everyone is predicting what will happen next day. So very many analysts believe that the chance that using the Constitutional Court, which is backed by loyalists of Maia Sandu, might not recognize the results of the elections, or maybe some mandates of the pro-Russian parties or considered to be pro-Russian will not be validated because of some problems which will be depicted. Or some believe that because the lack of ability to create a majority, we might see early elections in a few months. So the level of uncertainty, what will happen next day after the elections, is very big. If you ask me why the ruling party doesn't have a potential candidate, natural candidate to form a coalition, it's because in the last 4 years, they tried to and successfully destroy all potential coalition partners. Using various administrative resources, and not just administrative resources, they were not able really to build like-minded parties, helping also them, or at least not impeding them to become a heard voice on our political landscape. So they monopolized the entire discourse related to the European Union integration. And that's why it's everyone else is their enemy, who is not in agreement with the ruling party, is immediately considered or declared as Moscow spy or Moscow operator, something like this. So that's why it will be very difficult to imagine that we have a coalition in which ruling party will play a decisive role, which is bad, again, when we have to be in a position when we don't know what will happen to this country in a few days. Of course, the level of lack of confidence and uncertainty and insecurity is growing.
No, understood. Sorry, I hope that's...
Sorry.
It's not me. Might
no,
be you.
It's not you. No. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So, I mean, just carrying on this theme, what I find sort of difficult to judge at the moment is exactly what is driving the Russian strategy to influence the outcome of these elections, because they seem to be pouring in absolutely huge resources to do it. And on a scale we haven't seen before, and some of us observers have said to me, the ambition levels are much higher this time. So what is driving this strategy, do you think?
John, I don't think that the Russian strategy has changed dramatically. Of course, the war they launched against Ukraine had definitely played some role in changing or maybe adjusting a bit the strategy to the new realities. But Russia always wanted to keep Moldova under control. Look at that project memorandum. Two key items which made it completely unacceptable to Moldova. One is the desire to keep a military presence on the eastern part of Moldova, in Transnistrian region. Second, to offer Transnistria a veto right on every major foreign policy decision of Moldova. So basically to keep Moldova in this buffer zone forever, not to allow us to be anchored in Western economic, and not just economic, but also military and political structures. So now with this war, I'm sure that the interest is to make sure that behind the back of Ukraine, there is a country which is controlled or a kind of ally to Russia. Now, whether they spend more money or less money compared to the previous, as I said, back in 2009, 2014, 15, they were able to use more kind of leverage, which were at the disposal of this state, of the Russian government, like gas or trade or diaspora, which was in much bigger numbers there than now, since the economic crisis started in Russia. And because of the visa-free regime with the European Union, which we got back in 2014, very many Moldovans left Russia and moved towards Germany, Great Britain, Western Europe as such. So now probably they use much more new methods, like using more of dirty money, which they used before as well, but now probably lacking the more official kind of leverage. They use it. There was tools which are at their disposal. Of course, how much money they use, sometimes I'm sure that it's exaggerated in Moldova. We hear 100 million, then we hear 300 million, so we don't know exactly. But what we know for sure is that indeed they do use the money. But also, when we speak about the possible outcome of this election, I cannot restrain myself by not mentioning one element, John. The biggest enemies of Moldovans are Moldovans themselves, not the Russians, not the Americans, not the Europeans. We are our, because again, the power which this government and the president acquired 4 years ago was almost absolute. They didn't have a constitutional majority in the parliament, but they were lacking 2 or 3 seats. So they were controlling everything, including the justice sector, because when I hear about the successful reform of the justice system of Moldova, and you know it to some extent because you wrote on it, I'm just laughing a bit, because they were trying not to make it independent, but to take over, using various not veto, but vetting and various other stuff. And when you look at the results of these 4 years, you mentioned yourself, the economic, can we call it economic growth, 0.4% increase of GDP in 4 years? I think it's not growth, it's stagnation, it's even worse, decrease. 66% inflation in 4 years, 230,000 Moldovans left. And what is important, unfortunately, those who left are not leaving, or have not left just for the interest to find a job or a better paid job, but very many small and mid-sized and entrepreneurs are leaving because they don't have the confidence in the future of Moldova, unfortunately. So we were not able to use, or the government was not able to use this power which they had, and the unconditional support of the West. Unconditional, and that's not good again, because West, yes, the support for Moldova's fight against Russian propaganda, manipulation, money from the West should be unconditional. But the way the government was conducting the so-called reforms here should be criticized and scrutinized by the West, and especially by Brussels officially, or maybe less officially, but to a much bigger extent, and not to allow to fight to fight for democracy, but with illegal means. And the West unfortunately neglected it and ignored it. So again, we have here a combination of, again, Moscow's malign attitude, using all their resources, dirty ones, and plus the inefficiency of this government, which has put us into this difficult situation and difficult choice from very many people who believe that Moldova's future is in the EU, but who do not agree with the methods chosen by the ruling party to govern this country.
So there might be people who would vote against Maia Sandu's party because they don't like the methods, but are still in favor of European integration.
From what I see in the opinion polls is that the level of undecided voters is almost 40%. And I'm sure that very many of those who are undecided are exactly those who associate themselves with the European values. I mean, maybe in some more primitive sense, but that's how they view the future of Moldova. But they don't like the way the ruling party has decided to govern. Again, they came to power, you don't probably remember, 4 years ago with one slogan: "We fight corruption." And from what I understand, if you really want to fight corruption, you fight those who are in power, because those use, abuse, misuse, their situations. And if you ask me whom did they fight during these 4 years, only former politicians and the opposition. Not one minister, MP was sanctioned, or criminal cases were opened. So, and they forgot already about this slogan, fighting corruption. Now the entire slogan is "We fight Russia," because that's the biggest threat to our future. Again, no one diminishes the threat. And I still remember vividly when the war started and the risk was that Russians might occupy Odessa, then our physical survival was what really at the big issue. But we need really to sit down and to discuss what do we do about Moldova's future, how we change the economic realities, which is a major, very difficult situation. I don't I don't question it. But look, the discrepancy between not us and Estonia, or us and Germany on GDP per capita, the discrepancy between us and Romania just across the other river is 1:3 or 1:4 in terms of GDP per capita. And this discrepancy will grow, unfortunately, for obvious reasons. Lack of human resources in Moldova because of this huge brain drain. Lack of cheap money. I don't know when we get to become a member of the European Union so that we would be able to benefit from grants for agriculture, for small and medium-sized enterprise, whereas Romania gets it today. And it will, of course, so it's a major challenge. What should be our economic model? But instead of focusing on real issues, what kind of fiscal system we need, what kind of economic model we choose, we try to bring some other issues to the core of our elections. And I'm afraid that even after the elections, again, we will focus not on real issues, not on substantial issues, even how to prepare Moldova for European accession. We need to be ready. We are not ready at all.
Understood. I mean, of course, in the democratic world, it's not uncommon for election campaigns to focus on the issues that might lure voters to give their preference to a particular party, but don't really deal with the underlying problems of the country. But what you're describing there is of course, an unfortunate situation. It rather feels as though that gap between Moldova and Romania might just grow further. But I mean, broadly, what you were just describing about the current government's performance, it does remind me in many ways of what happened in Ukraine after 2014 when President Poroshenko was elected, because there were some, I think, very positive reforms carried out during that period. But in the area of the anti-corruption reforms, there was infrastructure set up, but it was never used for the purpose that it really should have been at the time, because I mean, there are structural reasons why countries and governments in these systems don't go after their own. But that's a kind of separate issue. But Iurie, we are sort of running out of time. And if I may, I just wanted to put one last question to you. And if you could be brief, that would be helpful. Do you think the outcome of these elections can affect the war in Ukraine?
Well, first, let me mention again that Moldova's future depends very much on Ukraine's ability to resist and to survive. Because if Ukraine is lost, if Russians come to Odessa, I have no illusions that they will stop only on the Prut River, which is the river or the border with NATO and the European Union currently. Therefore, I hope West continues to support Ukraine in its fight for independence and sovereignty. Moldova, of course, is important because it's just in the region. To some extent, it might affect the realities on the ground here in Moldova, depending on who is in power. But again, I believe that the abilities of the future governments of Moldova, whatever is their foreign policy orientation, will be very much limited. On one hand, by Romania's ability to control the gas flows, the oil products flow, 95% we get them from Romania. Without the Western financial support, we would be immediately bankrupt. And as you know, Russians never gave us one penny, even when they were in much better economic shape. So I hope that everyone in Moldova, including the so-called pro-Russian politicians, understand that the next day they will have to go to Brussels and to Bucharest to ask for money. The rhetoric, of course, will change in case there are new coalitions. But as I told you, I don't expect to see a pro-Russian coalition because they will not be able to have a majority and even to agree among themselves. The differences between those who are considered to be pro-Russians are quite big. On personal animosities, as you know, sometimes are stronger than the political interests of survival. So let's see, let's talk after this Sunday, once we have a clearer picture. But again, I don't think that we might be influenced somehow. Of course, today we've heard the news that some elements to build drones in Transnistrian regions were stopped at by our customs. If that's true, although sometimes I question the news here in Moldova, but if that's true, then it just shows that a new government could help somehow the Russians to continue this military build-up in Transnistrian region. But again,
Iurie, I certainly hadn't heard that.
Do something like this.
I certainly hadn't heard that tidbit of news.
Our president stated today. So whatever our president says, everything should be. I mean, everything is real, no fake news.
Understood. Iurie, we have to stop there. I want to thank you so much for joining the midweek briefing. It's been great to hear your really very clear and subtle observations of what's currently happening in Moldova. I want to thank our audience for being with us today and to, of course, tell you that we'll be back next week, same time, same place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.